we look at the geopolitical map of biblical prophecy, our eyes are naturally drawn to the Middle East or Russia. But in doing so, many Christians are completely overlooking a massive historic shift happening right now in the very heart of Europe. Germany is undergoing a radical transformation. After decades of military restraint, Berlin has triggered a Zeitenwende, a historical turning point, pouring hundreds of billions into rapid rearmament while aggressively pushing for a centralized European superstate. Why does this matter? Because according to the book of Daniel, the final global empire will emerge from a revived Roman system, a brittle but terrifyingly powerful alliance of iron mixed with clay. In this briefing, we will separate the breaking headlines from ancient scripture, divide hard facts from speculation, and reveal exactly why Germany is the critical linchpin in Daniel's final empire. For the past several decades, following the devastation of the 20th century, Germany has carefully maintained a posture of military hesitation and quiet diplomacy. They became the undisputed economic engine of the European Union, the financial powerhouse that held the continent together through countless sovereign debt crises and political storms, but they actively avoided the role of a military superpower. That era is officially over. We are currently witnessing a seismic shift in European politics, a transformation that historians and geopolitical analysts agree will redefine the balance of global power. Triggered by recent conflicts on the eastern borders of Europe and the growing instability of global alliances, the German government announced a historic policy shift known as the Zeitenwende. This is not just a political buzzword for an election cycle. It is a fundamental reversal of decades of foreign policy.
Get out now!
Germany has committed a massive special fund, initially well over 100 billion euros, specifically to rebuild, modernize, and aggressively expand its military forces. But this sudden military awakening is not happening in isolation. It is running parallel to a highly aggressive diplomatic push from Berlin
to
federalize the European Union.
If the opposition finds out, we are finished.
Leading German politicians and policy architects are now openly calling for an end to national veto powers within the EU. They are actively advocating for a unified European military command, a centralized European foreign policy, and the complete transformation of the European Union from a loose economic coalition into a cohesive sovereign federal state, essentially a United States of Europe, with Berlin acting as its central nervous system and primary financial backer. What we are watching is the rapid, forceful consolidation of European power. Nations that have historically guarded their deep-seated sovereignty are now being pressured by economic realities and security fears to surrender their independence to a centralized authority in Brussels, heavily directed by German influence. The political and military scaffolding for a massive, unified European superpower is being constructed right before our eyes in real time.
Get me the president! Launch authorization confirmed!
This
We're
is
losing
simply a
contact with the
logical
fleet! It's spreading
reaction
too
to a
fast!
dangerous
Initiate
world,
lockdown immediately!
a necessary evolution of the European project to survive the shifting tides of the 21st century. It is viewed purely through the lens of economics, defense strategy, and international relations. But for those who study the prophetic framework laid out in the Bible, this sudden drive for European centralization, anchored by the industrial and political might of Germany, rings a massive, ancient alarm bell. To understand what is truly forming on the European continent, we must step back from the modern news cycle
These
and look
markers
at the
signify the new
blueprint God
stabilization
gave us
zones.
thousands
We
of
deploy the
years
battle
ago.
groups here and here
For
immediately.
centuries, the concept of a unified European empire has fascinated historians and politicians alike. But for Christians who study biblical eschatology, the unification of Europe is not merely a political project, it is a profound prophetic necessity. We are watching Germany's sudden push for military and political federalization because it aligns perfectly with the geopolitical prerequisites for the final Antichrist system. To grasp the magnitude of what is happening today, we must look at the historical DNA of Europe. When the original Roman Empire collapsed, its power and influence did not simply evaporate into the ether.
Your cooperation
It
is essential
fractured
for
and
public
embedded
safety.
itself into the
Remain
nations of
calm and
Europe.
await further instructions.
Throughout
The
history,
city is secure.
various leaders have attempted to resurrect the glory and unity of Rome. And historically, the most successful and enduring attempt was the Holy Roman Empire, a sprawling political entity that dominated Central Europe for 1,000 years and was overwhelmingly anchored by the German nations. The very concept of a centralized European authority, a supreme imperial power governing diverse nations, is deeply woven into the historical fabric of Germany. When we see Berlin today aggressively pushing to eliminate national veto powers, proposing a unified European army, and attempting to bind the diverse cultures of Europe under one supreme federal law dictated from Brussels, we are watching history repeat itself. But this time, it is not moving toward a medieval empire. It is moving toward the precise, fractured global superpower that will one day hand its authority over to the Antichrist. The Bible makes it exceedingly clear that the final global dictator will not rise from a vacuum. He will rise from an existing coalition of nations, a 10-king confederacy that emerges from the geographical and cultural footprint of the ancient Roman Empire. Christians are watching Germany right now because you cannot build this final European superstate without German industry, German wealth, and German political will. Without Germany, the European Union is a fractured collection of competing interests. With Germany acting as the enforcement mechanism, it becomes an empire in waiting. The Zeitenwende, the military awakening of Germany, is the catalyst that transitions Europe from a purely economic zone into a hard-powered geopolitical force capable of fulfilling the darkest prophecies of the end times. To see exactly how this modern European integration was prophesied, we must turn to the book of Daniel, specifically chapter 2. In this profound passage, God reveals the entire timeline of human empires to King Nebuchadnezzar through a dream of a massive, terrifying statue. The head was made of fine gold, representing Babylon. The chest and arms of silver represented the Medo-Persian Empire. The belly and thighs of bronze represented Greece. And finally, the legs of iron represented the Roman Empire, the brutal empire that would crush and break everything in its path. But the vision does not stop with the historical Roman Empire. Daniel's attention is drawn down to the feet of the statue, the final stage of human government before the return of Jesus Christ. Daniel chapter 2, verses 41 through 43 says, "And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron. Forasmuch as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." This is one of the most astonishingly precise geopolitical prophecies in the entire Bible. Notice carefully that there is no fifth metal introduced. The iron of the Roman Empire continues all the way down into the feet and the toes. The final global empire is not a completely new foreign entity. It is a resurrected, modified version of Rome. But it has a fatal flaw. It is mixed with miry clay. This describes a confederation of nations that are forced together but are inherently incompatible. They will mingle themselves with the seed of men, attempting to unify through modern treaties, economic unions, and open borders, but they will not organically cleave to one another. Look at the European Union today. It is the absolute, literal embodiment of iron and clay. You have the iron, nations like Germany with massive industrial strength, military potential, and intense political will to dominate and unify. And you have the clay, nations with
the data
weaker
clearly
economies,
indicates that this
fiercely
direction is
independent
optimal
cultures,
for global stability.
and populations
We will
that
proceed
deeply
as
resent
planned.
being ruled by a centralized power in Brussels. They are bound together by a common currency, but they are constantly threatening to fracture. Germany is desperately trying to forge the iron and clay into one solid block, setting the perfect stage for the final confederacy to emerge. To maintain absolute clarity in our prophetic discernment, we must rigidly separate observable political reality from eschatological speculation. So, what are the hard,
We need food, let us
undeniable
through.
facts
Hold the
currently
line.
unfolding
Move
in
back
Europe?
now.
First, it is an undeniable fact that Germany is undergoing its most significant military expansion since the end of the Cold War. The massive special fund for the Bundeswehr, the German armed forces, is not a theoretical proposal. It is a legally binding commitment that is actively being spent on advanced fighter jets, naval expansion, and modernizing ground forces. Germany is decisively moving away from its historical pacifist stance and positioning itself to be the dominant military anchor of the European
Thank you for your
continent.
compliance. You're safe with us now.
Secondly, it is a documented geopolitical fact that Berlin is aggressively spearheading the push for a centralized European superstate. In recent European summits, German leadership has officially called for the abolition of the national veto in European Union foreign policy and security decisions. Currently, any single EU member state can block a major foreign policy action. Germany desperately wants to replace this with majority voting. If this happens, the European Union would no longer be a collection of sovereign nations negotiating with one another. It would become a single, colossal geopolitical entity that can force its will upon its smaller member states. Furthermore, it is a fact that the European Union is actively building the foundations for a unified continental military. They have already established the framework for an EU rapid deployment capacity, a highly mobile military force that operates under the banner of the European Union rather than NATO. Germany is not just participating in it, they are leading it, offering to provide the core troops and the logistical command structure. These are not conspiracy theories pulled from the dark corners of the internet. These are public policies, parliamentary votes, and documented geopolitical shifts being debated openly in Brussels and Berlin right now. The European Union is reaching a critical breaking point. It must either federalize into a singular sovereign power or risk fracturing entirely under the weight of its own internal economic and cultural contradictions. While the military expansion of Germany and the centralization of the European Union are hard facts, how we view these events through the lens of biblical prophecy requires careful interpretation. As Christians, we must proceed with discernment, recognizing the patterns of Scripture without making dogmatic claims that the Bible does not explicitly support. When we observe Germany pushing to strip away the national veto power in Brussels, many Christians are watching closely, interpreting this as the precise political mechanism required for Revelation chapter 17 to be fulfilled. The Apostle John wrote that 10 kings will receive power for 1 hour with the beast, and that these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. For 10 leaders to seamlessly hand over the economic and military might of an entire continent to one man, the legal and political framework for that sudden transfer of sovereignty must already be in place.
If this gets out,
The current German push to federalize Europe and eliminate national sovereignty could very well be the construction of that exact framework. Furthermore, the military awakening of Germany raises the profound question of how the Antichrist will eventually
If we see
project
movement
his
in the
power.
Baltics, we must assume
The
the
final
Balkan
global
front will
dictator
activate
will not
simultaneously.
rule by diplomacy
we need
alone.
to reinforce Eastern
Daniel
Europe
11
now.
makes it clear that he will honor the God of forces and conquer through overwhelming military might. A pacifist, economically sluggish Europe could never fulfill this role. But a heavily militarized Europe, unified under a central command and driven by German industrial efficiency, perfectly matches the biblical description of the terrifying iron-toothed beast that devours and breaks the earth in pieces. However, we must be absolutely clear on what we are not claiming in this briefing. We are not stating that a specific modern German leader is the Antichrist, nor are we claiming that the current European Parliament is the literal mark of the beast system. We are interpreting a geopolitical trend. We are looking at the system being built. The political centralization we see today may simply be the scaffolding that a future, incredibly deceptive leader will eventually hijack. The iron is currently mixing with the clay,
We're ruined!
and while we cannot set a date
market
for
is
when the
collapsing.
statue will finally stand complete, the geopolitical alignment is undeniably forming. When you browse the internet for videos on end times prophecy, you will quickly notice a recurring pattern. Many popular channels focus almost exclusively on globalist organizations, the World Economic Forum,
The details
or
must remain
vague
between us.
theories
If
about
the
a
opposition
one-world
finds out, we are
government
finished.
emerging out
I've
of
secured the
nowhere.
votes. Then we proceed as planned.
While globalism is certainly a factor in the last days, this generalized approach misses a critical, specific detail
Et je le
that the
dis haut et
Bible
fort,
insists
la
upon.
souveraineté de notre nation
The
n'est pas
Antichrist does not
négociable.
just
Elle
magically
n'est pas
appear
à
out of a
vendre.
generalized globalist vacuum. He rises from a very specific historical geopolitical footprint. Daniel and Revelation both make it clear that the final beast system is the resurrected Roman Empire. Because of this, many analysts make the mistake of looking everywhere except Europe. They see the European Union constantly bickering over budgets, arguing about borders, and struggling with political exits. And they conclude that Europe is too weak and divided to ever become a global superpower. But this is exactly what most channels completely misunderstand about Daniel's prophecy. Daniel did not say the final empire would be completely solid like the iron legs. He said it would be iron
Launch
mixed with
authorization
miry
confirmed.
clay.
We're losing contact with the fleet. It's
He
spreading too fast.
specifically
Initiate lockdown
prophesied
immediately.
that they would not organically cleave to one another. The internal friction, the cultural clashes, and the political arguments we see in Europe today are not proof that the prophecy is failing. They are the absolute proof that the prophecy is entirely accurate. The final empire is supposed to look fractured and fragile, right up until the moment it suddenly exerts the crushing strength of the iron. By dismissing Europe because of its internal divisions, many believers are taking their eyes off the very region where
These
the
markers
structural
signify the new
foundation
stabilization
of the
zones.
Antichrist
We deploy the battle
empire is
groups
being
here
built.
and here,
Germany
immediately.
is actively trying to mold the clay and the iron together, and the friction you see on the news is simply the prophetic reality of Daniel chapter 2 playing out in real time. We must not be distracted by vague globalist theories when the biblical blueprint points us directly to the political evolution of the European continent. So, as we move forward, what are the concrete, geopolitical signs that Christians should be watching for in the coming months and years? We must move past speculation and watch for actual policy shifts. First and foremost, you must watch the ongoing debate over
Your
the national
cooperation is
veto
essential
in the
for public
European
safety.
Union.
Remain calm and await
If you
further
see headlines
instructions.
announcing
The city
that the
is
EU
secure.
has officially moved to qualified majority voting for foreign policy and defense, meaning individual nations can no longer stop the EU from acting as a single entity, you will know that a massive prophetic threshold has been crossed. This is the exact legal mechanism required to transform Europe from an economic bloc into a sovereign beast system. Secondly, watch for the deeper integration of the German military with its neighbors. We are already seeing Dutch brigades being fully integrated into the German command structure. Watch for the rapid expansion of the EU rapid deployment capacity and any moves to create a true unified European army that answers to Brussels rather than NATO. The iron teeth of the final empire require a centralized military force, and Germany will be the industrial heart providing the weapons, the budget, and the logistics. Third, watch for a catalytic crisis. Historically, European integration only takes massive leaps forward during times of extreme fear and crisis. Whether it is a catastrophic economic collapse, a massive energy shortage, or a sudden expansion of war on its borders, watch for a crisis that forces the nations of Europe to willingly surrender their sovereignty out of pure desperation. Finally, watch for the emergence of a multi-speed Europe. As integration becomes harder, we may see a core group of nations, perhaps exactly 10, decide to bypass the slower members and form an inner circle of supreme federal power. This could perfectly set the stage for the 10 kings mentioned in Revelation 17, who will ultimately hand their unified power over to the Antichrist. Do not just read the headlines, watch the structural changes underlying them. As we process this geopolitical intelligence, it is incredibly easy to feel overwhelmed or even fearful. Watching the aggressive centralization of power and the rapid rearmament of nations can make it seem as though the world is spinning wildly out of control. But we must return to the ultimate conclusion of Daniel's vision. Daniel did not just see a terrifying statue of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. He saw the end of the story. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 44, the prophet delivers the greatest news in human history. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Daniel saw a stone cut out without human hands that struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay, grinding the entire terrifying system to dust, and that stone grew into a mountain that filled the whole earth. That stone is Jesus Christ. The rise of a European superstate, the military awakening of Germany, and the formation of the Iron and Clay Confederacy are not signs of God losing control. They are the undeniable proof that God is sovereignly orchestrating human history toward its prophesied conclusion. The geopolitical stage is simply being set for the glorious return of the King. Therefore, our response as Christians must not be panic, hoarding, or political obsession. Our response must be aggressive spiritual vigilance and deep personal holiness. We are not called to stop the statue from forming. We are called to be ambassadors of the stone that will eventually crush it. Examine your heart today. Are you placing your trust in the fragile political and economic systems of this world? Systems that are destined to be ground to dust? Or is your life built entirely upon the unshakable rock of Jesus Christ? Stay sober, remain deep in the Word of God, and keep your eyes looking upward, for our redemption draws near.